I'm just kidding. We didn't have to separate this group, but I thought it would be a little bit different to do the conflict resolution kind of separate so that we can be a little bit more open. Not that, you wouldn't be as open with your wives here. But as far as talking about conflict resolution, there are some very basic things that we need to put in front of us as we get started. One, we need to remember everything we just talked about as far as communication. One, it's going to lessen the conflicts we are in if we can learn to communicate better. But two, it's the tools to actually deal with conflict. And so that cannot be pushed aside. You can't have one without the other. But the second is we need to be really careful with unrealistic expectations, fairy tale images. And, I used to think this was more on the women's side, because girls, I've raised one, they're small. Even when they're small, they're doing pretend weddings and the fairy tales, and they're watching all the movies and Cinderella and all these things that they get this fairy tale image of marriage and so forth. But we might not say fairy tale, but sometimes guys also get unrealistic expectations. And it comes in the idea of, well, especially if you came out of a good home. And this is the thing, we associate broken homes and so forth with continuation of that, and there's other reasons for that. But sometimes we just assume that the person we marry is going to do all the things that our mother did. Or we feel like we're going to have the same relationship that our parents did. And that's not necessarily true. And so sometimes we have some unrealistic expectations, and we expect things to be in some way perfect. And there's nothing that's perfect except for God. That's the only thing that's perfect. And being able to understand that, it's not settling for something less, it's just being real. Okay? So when we talk about conflict resolution, the idea that we can eliminate conflict completely is just not true. There will be conflict. There's going to be conflict. How you handle conflicts as they arise will be one of the most important concepts to sustain marriage, happiness, and contentment. Now, I'm not going to have this on the slides, but I'm going to just walk through something really quickly. If you're a Bible student and you've studied the book of Acts, you might remember that very early in the church, there was conflict. And there's a pattern to that conflict. Every time there's a conflict and they successfully resolve it, the church grows. I want to make sure we catch that. Every time there was a conflict and they successfully resolved it, not ignored it, swept it under the table, whatever, the church grew. There is this reality that once you meet a conflict, that if you successfully resolve the conflict, there's going to be growth. You guys, how many of you all played sports at some point? Did y'all play sports? I think most guys, Charlie's still trying to play them now. All right. Not trying, Charlie, I'm sorry, is playing those now. The reality is that you only get better when you push yourself. You're in conflict. Whether it's weightlifting or something like that, you have to push yourself until it hurts, right? No pain, no gain was the old saying. I grew up in Florida for the most part, moved to Kentucky when I was in high school. Moved from Sarasota, Florida to Burkesville, Kentucky. Let that one kind of swim around a little bit. I played football in Florida. Burkesville didn't have a football team, as far as I know, still doesn't have a football team. But we had 2 days in August. We had one at 2 o'clock sometime, 2 o'clock in the afternoon. This is before they started, because of some of the health issues and heart issues and deaths. This is before they were worried about this. This is back when we had the stainless steel slides, right? They didn't care about our health back then. At 2 o'clock and then at 6 o'clock, which, you were thankful for the 6 o'clock one. You push yourself. You throw up there was at least 2 or 3 guys throwing up by the time you're done with practice. Because it's so hot and they pushed us. My JV football coach was a runner, was a marathon runner. And this is how he introduced our practices the first whole week. He said, we had to show up in pads, with shoulder pads and helmet. No, we didn't have to leg pads. And we show up to practice. We're ready to practice football. I'm ready for the drills. I'm ready for the slides. I'm ready for all this stuff. And he's like, all right, y'all follow me. and we began to run. He has no equipment on. He's in shorts and a t-shirt, and he's a runner, and we have to run with him. And we ran for an hour around not the football field, but around the greater field of the complex. And then he told us later at the end of the week, he said, I wanted you to drop and see if you get back up. Why? Because conflict builds things. So we need to be careful. We don't want to purposely bring in conflict, but we do need to see conflict in a more reasonable and honest way. There's going to be conflict, and when there is conflict, we want to successfully overcome it because we'll grow in the process. Okay? I think there's a tendency sometimes to avoid conflict. We just don't want to deal with it. Well, we're setting ourselves back. We're setting our marriage back then, and we're setting any growth that would have came from that also back. So we need to be honest, and we need to be careful with how we approach or think about conflict. It's not a sign necessarily that our relationship is bad, and we'll get into that here in a minute. There's a passage in James. It's a little different context, but it's still the same premise. Where do wars and fights come from among you? James says, do they not come from your desires for pleasure that war in your members? Now, he's talking about the greater body, and he's talking about interaction, not just with husbands and wives, but it implies that. Where do the fights and wars? Because we have competing desires or wants or needs or whatever, and it leads to conflict. I want to share a story. I'm a little bit of a history person. I don't know if you're into history, but back in 1925, there was a little war between Greece and Bulgaria. And this is how it happened. Supposedly, there was a soldier who had a pet dog. And the pet dog got loose, and it ran across the border, the line, and one of the soldier ran out to get him, of course, in his fatigues and so forth. And the army on the other side shot and killed him. And then they started to respond and back and forth. There's a lot of different conflicting stories of how it started, but that's one of the general stories that is shared. And the story is called The War of the Stray Dog. And you think of how silly. You have two nations, two countries at a war because someone's pet dog ran across the line and someone ran to retrieve it. And you think, well, that's crazy. And then you think about relationships and someone, you had a full-out argument because of toothpaste or the garbage or something that's something silly. Where do these things come from? We need to be honest with where we're approaching and coming from as far as our own desires, our own wants, and so forth when it comes to conflict. For Christians, our goal has to be something different than winning the fight. That's how the world sees things. We're going to win the fight. I'm not a big TV watcher anymore, but I've watched, when I was younger, I watched a lot of TV. Well, not a lot, but I watch it in evenings. Sometimes we watch old sitcoms at the house. We don't really watch anything new. I can't get behind anything new. And not saying that old shows were good morally and so forth, but you see a trend. You see a trend in the relationships on the shows where the conflict, you see another trend too, guys, where guys are always kind of portrayed as being bumbling and dumb and so forth, which is, does art follow society or society follow art? I mean, this idea that men have been presented as just another big kid is part of our problem societally because men have just been degraded. And that's for another conversation, I know, but think about the relationships in some of those sitcoms if you watch them. So think about how they play off of the conflict in those shows. If you go way back, and I know he turned out to be a bad guy, but if you see, like the Cosby Show, you see how they work in tandem and they'd work out things and there'd be resolution. You go forward, and as you go forward, you see more and more conflict and more fighting. It became the norm, as if this is how relationships are supposed to be. So there's a show, King of Queens. I don't know if you ever watched that show. And they just fight all the time on there, calling each other names and all kinds of stuff. And it became the norm. This is what our neighbors and our kids are growing up thinking that this is supposed to be. And the whole idea, and the reason I bring up that one particularly, is they want to win the argument. That's all they care about, is winning the argument. That's not a good way to build a relationship. Not if you want it to be fruitful and a happy relationship, and one that's going to be, healthy. But our goal has to be different than just winning an argument. It's got to be healthier, stronger marriage. It's got to be a godly marriage. I put a reference up here. We're not going to go back and read the whole thing. But in the book of Ephesians in chapter 5, the latter part of that chapter is talking about the church using the relationship of the husband and wife. So you have that kind of interplay. But he does talk about, this is where the jokes come from as far as the obedience and so forth. We've already made some of those jokes this morning. But where the wife is told to be, to submit herself to her husband as unto the Lord. And then we hear that the husband is supposed to love his wife and that he should even give himself for her. And we end up with this picture like, well, the wife has to be obedient and, a guy has to take a bullet if one comes. But you're probably not going to have to take many bullets for your wife. But the whole point in that passage was the sacrificial love that a husband's supposed to have. Well, what's that whole point? Why am I pointing to Ephesians 5 anyway? Because there's a different standard. If we're going to be Christians and we're going to look at marriage, we need to accept God's standard, not the world's standard. God's standard is submitting to one another. The verse that starts right before that, I think it's verse 20 or 21, says, and every one of you submit to one another in love. This idea that we are interested in desiring the best for the other person. Why wouldn't we want that in our marriage? This is the person that we are going through life with. This is the person, I'm going to go back to sports. When I was growing up, of course, Michael Jordan was the thing. And I'm sorry, I'm biased, I know, but LeBron James is no Michael Jordan. I said it, that's my opinion. There you go, we're going with it. All right. But he did have a running mate, Scottie Pippen. Okay? And people go back and forth, and, he's even tried to throw some things out there lately. But, those two worked together well, along with others that came along. But that tandem worked well. At the same time period was Stockton and Malone. You had that awesome pick and roll game. Anyway, we'll talk about sports. But the reason why it worked is because they had a relationship together. Not a marriage, obviously, but they had a relationship. They understood each other. They knew where each other were going to be, and it made them better. Right? If my wife is better, it makes me better. If I'm better, it makes her better. So conflict can't be just winning the fight. It has to be winning the marriage. The marriage has to win. And that's the ultimate thing that I think we need to think about in the background as far as conflict resolution. Not just how do I get out of this, or how do I win, but how can we resolve this for the betterment of our marriage. There are a couple things that we are going to talk about as far as concepts, and then we're going to talk about some practical things that I hope will be good and valuable to you. Again, these are some of the same things that we share. Most of this material, it's been kind of simplified, but years ago with my doctorate, this was my dissertation. I took all the technical pieces out of it, but this is empirical study after empirical study. These things are proven time and time again within religious realms, but also outside of religious realms. When these things are applied, you end up with better results. Okay? So the first is honest evaluation. Often individuals, couples conceive themselves through rose-tinted glasses. In other words, we don't see everything. We see it through some kind of filter. Okay? How can we be more honest? How do we, sorry, I didn't mean to pass through that. How do we approach this and say, okay, I need to be honest, not just with what someone else did wrong or said wrong or the argument, but my part in it. I have this concept, we'll actually come into this here in a minute, but my students, they'll come in with a conflict, whether it's the girls or it's sometimes the guys, but they'll be like, so-and-so, and they want you to take sides. And it really blows their minds when I don't take sides. And I said, okay, I have two questions I always end up asking them. One is, who do you want to be? They're not thinking about that. They're thinking about the problem. And they want to win the problem, or they want to be proven right. I'm like, who do you want to be? And usually I stumble with that. And there's a reason, because they're not in that mode. And there's a reason why I'm doing that. I'm trying to pull them out of that. But there's an ultimate question. Who do you want to be? Because if you see that and know that, then everything should be in service to that. If this is what I want to be, then this conflict, or whatever it is, I need to approach it with that in mind. I need an honest evaluation of my motives and who I am and who I'm trying to be. The second one, and we'll come up with that, I ask students when they're in conflict, and I ask this with couples too. Do you own your part? Okay? Do you own your part? So concept 2, we'll get to that one here in a second, is making a plan to deal with conflict. I think this is one of the most important things for a couple to do. I don't care if you've been married 50 years or you've been married 5 days. If you didn't do premarital counseling, or do good premarital counseling, where they went through stuff like this, this is important. This doesn't have to be in a binder kind of plan, but this is understood by both parties. This is how we handle conflict. What I mean by that, you might have heard, and maybe this is a practice in your house, we're not going to go to sleep angry. It doesn't work for everybody. But if it doesn't work for you, it may be, okay, we don't go to work the next day until we work out whatever the problem is. Maybe I'm not good when I'm angry. I need to sleep it off and talk about the next day. Whatever it is, I need a plan. We need, me and my spouse need a plan that we both agree on to help facilitate a conflict. Why is that important? Because anything that you do needs rules. If you went out on that soccer field last night, Charlie, and you just threw a ball out there, and there were no rules, how fun would that be? Maybe for a moment or two, while the boys are beating up on each other, they'll think it's fun. But eventually it's going to grow old because you're not seeking anything. You're not trying to achieve anything. There's no sense of accomplishment. There's no sense of motive or forward movement. All those things that make sports worthwhile are because there are rules. We get this concept in our mind that rules are some kind of negative, that they keep us from enjoying things. And in fact, a lot of times they're the parameters even of what makes for something to be enjoyable. There's a lot of unspoken rules, but there needs to be some that are spoken. And this is agreed upon. Not because I told you that you should do it this way, but you and your spouse decided this is how we're going to handle. Because what ends up happening? We know that we have boundaries and rules. It's important for a couple to develop a plan for how conflicts, arguments are to be resolved in their home. I've heard people, well, we never argue in front of the kids. Is that a good idea or a bad idea?
Probably good for them to see conflict resolution.
Man, you should just argue with your wife all the time, right? No? Both answers, it's like someone asking you if you've stopped beating your wife. It's kind of a trick question, isn't it? Because if you say, no, you're still beating your wife, you say, yes, well, why were you beating your wife? All right, there's this argument that goes both ways. Well, I'm not going to let my kids see us arguing, or the other way, they're just going to see you. No, they need to see you, when you have a disagreement, how you resolve it. If you have the argument here, and you resolve it over here, they don't learn anything. I'm not saying there are some arguments that they don't need to be a part of, or there's some conflicts, rather, that they don't need to be a part of. There could be something very, very serious that's just not age appropriate or whatever, a problem in the family. Life is hard sometimes. There's some hard stuff that comes our way. There are things that not me and Tiff had to directly face, but because of choices of our family members that we got involved in that we never thought we would have to deal with. And there was a lot of stress, not necessarily between us, but it seeps in there because it's around us, right? How you deal with, you need a plan. You need a plan for your benefit, your kids' benefit, and to understand this is how we're going to resolve things when we have a conflict. Again, it could be something as simple as, if we're going to have an argument, we learned this really quickly. My wife likes to talk things out. Most women do. When I get angry or frustrated, I don't want to talk. Anybody with me? Anybody grow silent? So this is what would happen early. I'm silent because I'm frustrated, whatever. And she's over there. What's wrong? Tell me what's wrong. What's it? They're like, nothing's wrong. And I get more frustrated, right? And then eventually she learned that, okay, just leave me alone for a little while, and then we can come talk about it. Let me kind of get past that first initial where I kind of shut down, and I'm not saying I'm proud of that or whatever, it's just how I'm wired, and then we can talk about it. And you know what? A lot of frustration on both our parts went away when we understood that about each other, right? I knew she needed to talk through it. I couldn't just ignore it, but she also knew that I needed some space to be able to kind of get through it, and then we can come back and talk about it. It's not like a rule. There's not like a 10 commandments of arguing in this house on my refrigerator, but it became an accepted plan of how we deal with things. We also have the rule: we don't go to bed with being angry. I feel like we've pretty much kept that, but whatever works for you, but you need a plan. And you can't come up with a plan when you're in a place where you're heated and arguing, because you don't think well in those moments. It needs to be known ahead of time. Here's the big one. This is where we're going to spend most of our time. We're going to fight fair. I don't mean, if we're talking about physical fighting, that's not what we're talking about. We're not condoning any kind of abuse. That's not what I'm saying by these words. I'm talking about arguments. When there's a disagreement, argument, we need to remember that we need to fight fair. There's a lot that I can share on this. There's just so much time and so much we can do. And I'm going to try not to add a bunch of extra stuff here. But this is a big one for me. This is what we spend a lot of time in counseling on, is that people, when they get in conflicts, they do not fight fair. And it just perpetuates the problem rather than resolving it. So we're going to talk about some things related to this as we talk about some rules of fighting fair. But there's a lot more to it. Okay? But this at least gives us a place to start from. One, this word cooperation. We're in this together. I don't want to keep falling back on sports analogies, but I think they're really powerful, because a lot of times, and we can do this with military analogies too, a lot of times, you feel like it's you and your team versus the world sometimes. And it creates this atmosphere where you may not get along with each other all the time, but you have a common goal. And it creates an atmosphere that you have to cooperate, or you're not going to win. We've got to have a foster spirit of cooperation with the goal of fighting for a win-win. Not so I win, but that we win. And we'll talk about a little bit about compromise, but we need to be really, really careful with that. These are things you meant to tell your spouse, but failed to do so. I don't know how I got that. Anyway. But we want to talk about the idea of, I know what happened. Out of order. Apologize. That threw me off. Let me reset. Rule 1 is cooperation, that bowed part, just ignore it for a second. But the foster a spirit of cooperation, we're on the same team. We want that win-win, okay? The last part of that, just ignore that. These are things that just are rules as we build that game plan as far as how we're going to resolve conflict. We need to understand it's a win-win. The second one is missing for some reason. That's how it's out of order. There is a thing called holdings, and this is not developed by me. This is developed by the doctors, Parrott, both husband and wife are doctor. They're both psychologists. They write there's several books out there. Some of them are really good. Some of them are, but anyway, it's the idea of an exercise. I'm going to share with this exercise. I have never, in the time of my counseling, ever had anybody to carry this out. But there's a principle that if you can find a way to exercise the principle rather than the exact pattern, it will be to your benefit. And here's the idea. Pick a specific day each week where each spouse will sit down and write 2 positive things they meant to tell their spouse. How well do you think you're going to do on that? Okay, so I don't want you to pay attention to that detail as much as the concept behind it, because this is really, really important. There's a lot of things that go through the week that we don't say that we should have said. Some of them are negative, and we held them back. A lot of them are positive. Well, I meant to say it. How many times outside of marriage, at church, at work, at school, at whatever it is that you deal with on a daily basis, someone did something nice, someone did something good, but you never got around, you never got a chance to tell them, hey, thank you, but then time kind of swept by, and so it never was said. Does that ever happen? How many times is it that something has happened that you're like, oh, I'm thankful for that. Someone did something good, something. How about the times when you did something right, something good, and they actually acknowledge it? Make work a little bit better. I mean, if you're at work and nobody says anything to you, maybe you're fine with that. I'd be like, good or bad. If someone comes around, you know what, Charlie, I thank you for working with my daughter with her singing and so forth. She's really shown improvement. I mean, you may not be looking for me to tell you that, but when you walk away, if you not feel a little bit better about what you're doing, your time spent. Those are like, I know coins are kind of a thing of the past, but if you imagine having, currency in your hand, and you're spending that currency when you're making decisions and you're making discussions and you're spending it. This goes for leadership too, by the way. And you're spending it out. You're hoping to get back so that you can spend it again. How do you feel? It's saying those things that were meant to be said, kind of because of time or whatever, didn't get said. So having something in the week, every once in a while, a reminder in your phone, hey, what's something that you haven't said that's good or positive? And getting that out there can be this what we're talking about with this holding exercise and sharing it. Now this exercise would be 2 positive, 1 negative. And the negative, if you share, you have to give 30 minutes before you respond. Because we want to conversate. We don't want to just do that responding from the first one, where we're not listening and understanding. But I really would even say on the positive, if you just take that part of it. Remember, the rule and the thing that we're trying to do is fight fair. So if I'm giving you compliments, if I'm recognizing you're good, when we do have a disagreement, what happens? Well, let me put it the other way. If I'm never complimenting you, I'm never pointing out the things you do right, things you do good, I only point out the things we disagree with and the things that you mess up on, what perception am I giving?
Never do anything right.
How quickly can that be? I don't keep meaning to pull from things, but I think a lot of people have dealt with kids, whether you have your own kids nieces and nephews, work at a school. When we have to deal with a student like at school and they've done something wrong, whatever, it takes, and I purposely do this, positive interactions with that student in order to keep a relationship with them. Otherwise, this is what you're going to get because, teenagers are not, if you can imagine this, teenagers are not mature. Can you imagine that with me? Brendan back there, I'm sorry, man. But, they're not mature. They think they are sometimes, but they're not. And they don't think through everything. So what ends up happening is you have to fuss at the student. They don't see that they messed up and you got fussed at. They're like, oh, Dr. Secula doesn't like me. They're always on me about this, whatever. If, when they're doing right and doing good, I'm complimenting them, I undercut their own argument. Right? It's not even a conscious thing. It's a subconscious thing. It works in our marriages. It's not the scheme. This is not scheming. This is about fighting fair. I can't expect you to fix things that are wrong or whatever and not offer you the opportunity to experience the good that you do and to be rewarded or to be at least be recognized for it. So that's one way you can do it. There's other ways. It's a concept I want you to see. It's being able to say and go back if you miss the opportunity to say it. Number 2 is rules for firefighting is ownership. I already mentioned this once with one of the rules I give my students. Ownership is about the husband and wife taking proper ownership of their piece of the conflict. If your piece is 1% and hers is 99%, I'm still taking ownership of the 1%. Now, why is that important? It allows for problems to be resolved, and then this idea of management, we'll get here in a minute. But it takes, I've got skin in the game. We're in this together. Remember, we're talking about cooperation? I'm going to own what's mine, and that's more inviting for you to own what's yours. It is just part of the human psyche that if I don't take ownership of mine, even if it seems smaller to me, and theirs seems bigger, and they're not going to take ownership of theirs. Again, we're talking about rules. I'm not saying you take ownership of everything. You take ownership of what's yours. Taking ownership of everything, that's that placating. That's taking a dive. That's not long-term success. Ownership is about the husband and wife taking proper ownership of their piece of the conflict. So it's we're sitting in a counseling office, husband saying this, wife saying this, saying, okay, well, whatever. Yeah, but and something comes out that they do, and yeah, but they do this and that and whatever. They're distracting, they're not taking ownership. What happens when they say, okay, yeah, you're right, I need to work on that. Here's what I'm going to do to work on that. I just invited you to do the same. This is really, it seems so trivial at times, but I'm telling you, it is so critical. And it does work. Now, does it work in every scenario? No. Does it always work? The habit of it works. So if you're in the habit of fighting and not fighting fair, and you go in and start using these things and do it one time and expect things to be different, that's not necessarily going to be the case. You do this every time you fight, and things are going to change. It's like a recipe. If you have, I don't know how many of you all cook? Do you all cook? You cook? You do a little cooking. Yeah. Who's the grill masters in here? Grill masters. Anybody do their own marinade or steak? Man, you all are just quiet. I'll tell you what. There's somebody who feels like they got the best marinade ever. They got the secret on everybody. You got that guy? No? Okay. That's me, by the way. I got the best marinade. It's right out of a recipe book. Anyway. It's okay. It's okay. It's not the best. I've had better. The idea of what you put into something changes what you get back. It's just true. I don't care if it's a marinade for a steak. I don't care if it's the seasoning you put on a steak or if it's a cake. what you put in is going to change what you get back. And you think, well, so-and-so won't do, so-and-so won't do, so-and-so won't do. Yet you're focused on the person that you can't change. The person you can change is you. You don't change things by, completely changing the other person, but you can change. Now, does that mean they're going to come all the way around to where they need to be? I don't know. But I guarantee you it's going to change. Because you can't put in different things and get back to the same. You're going to get something different. Now, it may be worse for a little bit because that person has to deal with the change and they don't know how to deal with it because they're used to. We fight in habits. You understand that, right? Like everything in our life and everything, we fight in default. However, we're used to arguing. However, we're used to communicating. That's how we fight. That's how we argue. That's how we communicate. And changing that is not an easy thing. But if you change it, you force the other person to change. There's this in family systems and all that stuff that really gets into this. But the reality is you need to take ownership of what's yours. Even if it's a small thing. Matter of fact, if it is a small thing and you can find it and take ownership of it, that might be your doorway to having a better conversation. All right, rule number 3. I'll give you the example there. I'll pass by this too quickly. One way that we can avoid, or one way we can take ownership, is to avoid criticism. Now, there is, Gottman has this whole thing on the 4 horsemen. I told you he's not a very religious person, but he takes that picture, of course, out of Revelation. And he talks about the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, the instant destruction to a marriage. One of them is the idea of criticism. And you might think, well, how can you not criticize? Now, it's not that you're not pointing out things. It's this idea of criticizing the person, not the actions. Okay? It creates distance. It just does. One way to foster ownership is to avoid criticizing and instead make an appropriate complaint when necessary. That might sound like I'm playing with words, but there is a difference. The difference seems subtle, but the results can be powerful. So let me look at this. Making criticism generally starts with a you statement. I already went into this once. A complaint generally starts with an I statement. A criticism may go as follows. You always treat me unfairly. Instantly, what have I created? Where have I put you? I put you on the defensive. And once you get you're in the defense, you're going to put the walls up. It's just a natural tendency. You always treat me unfairly. A complaint in the same situation may sound like, I feel like I don't get a fair opportunity to voice my opinions. There's a difference between the two, and it may seem subtle, but I always wish we could do this, and I could show you this. HIPAA would never allow this, but with a group of even students or teenagers. I do this with college students, do this with adults. It's going to do the same thing every time. If you put them in a room and you start saying, using you statements versus I statements, and watch how they respond. It is subtle at first. You think you're saying the same thing, but the way it's heard is completely different. I feel I don't get a fair opportunity to voice my opinions. I'm just telling you how I feel. It's nothing about whatever you take from that is on you. But when I say you, I am putting it all on you. Does that make sense? So one of these fair fighting rules, and one of these ways to take ownership, is I'm taking ownership of how I feel and my spot in this, and not just instantly going to blame. There may be blame to share. There may be, you did something. If someone came up and punched me in the face, they did that. It's not for me to own. They did that. And I'm not talking about the scenario. I'm talking about a conversation between two people trying to resolve a conflict. Do we understand the difference? If Stacy comes up here and just falls off and punches me in the face, I'm not going to get up and say, I feel disappointed and frustrated and a little swollen when you swing your hand at me like that. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about conversations with your spouse. So please understand the difference. We're not walking around doing this, someone hits you with an uppercut that you're going to go and respond this way. But hopefully your wife's not hitting you with an uppercut. And hopefully more so if she does, that she had a really good reason or something else is going on. I don't know what's happening there. That's probably the city councilor. All right. The phrasing, and I put this at the very bottom, the phrasing allows the complaint to be heard, feelings expressed, but it takes a personal attack away. I don't want you to answer me out loud. I just want you to think about how you argue. And if you say you never argue, 1 John chapter 1, verse 8. All right. Verse 9, sorry. There is a tendency. I already told you, when I get whatever, I get quiet. I don't want to argue. I don't like to argue. My challenge is to go back and resolve it after I cool off. Because if I don't, I've not resolved it. So I know that about me, and I know that about my situation. You may be one who's more fiery, and you respond, and you're outward. I'm not better than you. You're not better than me. We're different. But we need to understand that about who you are. And you need to ask yourself, okay, do you go on the attack? If you go on the attack, you've got two choices. You can say, this is just the way I'm wired, and that's how it's going to be. Or you can try to curb it and help your relationship. I can't make that choice for you, but I'm going to promise you, you're going to get a whole lot farther if you learn to not go to the blame game to start. If you want to fight fair, this is a rule. Take ownership. Ownership not of what you've done, but of your emotions that are coming into the equation. Do not lie about emotions. This is one of the hardest things. This is what I tell women too, not just us guys. If you are angry, say you're angry. This is one of the hardest things to get through to people. We try to sugarcoat things. I'm not angry, I'm frustrated. No, you're angry. We even do it with God. Have you ever noticed that? With Jesus in the temple. We say he was filled with what? Righteous indignation. He was mad. He had every right to be, but he was angry. Well, why do we feel compelled to put a different term on it? Because anger sounds terrible, sounds bad. We don't want to associate that with Jesus. And it's not being truthful. If I'm angry, I'm angry. Why am I angry? I may not have a reason to be angry, and that's on me, and I've got to adjust it, and I've got to deal with it. But lying about the emotion doesn't help me either. Okay? All right. Rule number 3, respect. Respecting one's spouse should always be of the utmost priority. There's a lot of things that go into it. I'm just going to talk about a couple. The best way to build respect is to promote an environment of appreciation. So you remember I was talking about this holding idea, the idea of appreciating, pointing out things you see and that you appreciate about your spouse is so important because when you get into this moment, the scales are a little bit more even. This is one that we talk a lot to women and husbands both about, but wives and husbands, don't run your spouse down to someone else. You need to confide in someone about something going. Make sure you choose those people very carefully. Don't just openly run your spouse down. I want to remind us that in biblical speaking, your spouse and you are one. And you're running down the other part of you. We shouldn't publicly run down our spouse. We need to show them respect. We need to be diligent in seeking opportunities to express that appreciation and for each other. It doesn't matter if it's something small or something big. Now, you're not going to be able to run around, she's not going to be able to run around and compliment you on everything you do that's wonderful, and that's just going to come off fake and phony anyway. But we need to be keeping those things in mind in the back of our mind. All right. Spouses should avoid being cruel. And this is a big one. There's no reason to be cruel to each other, and diligently seek opportunities to express appreciation. Studies have shown that happy couples have learned to scan and give a situation and look for positives, seek out points of appreciation in their relationship. This practice counters the tendency to bring up negatives with too much frequency, promotes a healthier balance of communication. There's another layer to this that we just don't have to get time to get into. One of the things that's been proven in counseling is having couples just go do works of service together. So, in other words, volunteer at a soup kitchen or down at the Humane Society, or go door knocking, or to go help with the nursing home or whatever it is, because when they see each other doing something good, there's no argument that it's not good. They share in that appreciation. If we want to fight fair, we need to find ways to show appreciation. We're going to end kind of where we started, or one of the places we were in the first lesson, in empathy. It's important for a husband, for a wife to learn to use empathy. I don't know why this is hard for us, but I think it's especially hard for men. We want to fix things. We are very linear. We want A to B to equal C and move on to D, E, and F. Okay? And life doesn't work that way. It's hard. It doesn't work that way, though. We need to be empathetic towards our spouse. It takes more than feeling bad when they have a bad day. It's the idea, okay, if I were in their shoes and I experienced what they experienced, I might feel the same way they feel. By the way, you can apply this to any relationship, and I promise you get further. But it's so important. We tend to make judgments too quick. I don't know how many times I've heard the expression, well, you shouldn't be upset about that. You just invalidated that person's whole experience. And you just did so much damage to your ability to be able to communicate and understand. Empathy. You take one word and just put a plan on people. It doesn't mean you accept what they're saying or doing or believing or whatever it is, but you're trying to understand them so that you can communicate with them. By the way, one of the keys to evangelism, too. You go in and talking to someone who has a different background, different belief, and you just go in trying to correct everything without understanding why they believe what they believe, you're not going to get very far. They're not going to be willing to listen to you. They're going to put the defenses up. So it doesn't matter what relationship we're in, these things are going to be important. Conflict resolution, an important aspect of a strong, healthy relationship. Things brought up in this list that are intended to build awareness, okay? I don't intend it to be an exact formula that you can go plug in and do, but we want to build on things that are positive and work towards. You need to fight fair. You need to work for communication. You want the marriage to win. Okay? I want to say this in kind of closing here, but there is this high calling that Christians have. And you see it in front of you. It's in the Sermon on the Mount, it's in the Beatitudes, to be peacemakers, not placaters. And there's a big difference. It is not agreeing to be mad at each other and not respond. It's resolving conflict. It starts in our home. It's for our own benefit. A stronger marriage, a stronger relationship is going to make a stronger husband, a stronger wife. It's going to allow a better example, and it's going to provide a better foundation for our kids, if our kids are in the picture. It's going to increase our ability to respond and to react to other people. Because we're practicing it at home, it's going to become a natural part of who we are. There is, and I'm going to tell you this just as a little side note. There's a study, there's ongoing studies of something that's called EQ. I don't know if you've heard of that or not, but it's the emotional quotient instead of the intellectual quotient, IQ. What they have proven is that people who have higher EQ matters more in being successful, even on jobs, than people with higher IQ. And what is that EQ? Being able to communicate and understand emotionally between people. Where does it start with? All those things we've been talking about today. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God. We're going to wrap up with that. And I appreciate you all giving me your attention. The ladies are starting to come back in. So we're going to take a break. And we will be ready for our last session here in about 7-8 minutes. Appreciate you guys.